If every time you see a rainbow it feels kind of magical, what I'm about to share will at least plant a seed that every moment can feel magical, can be magical. Welcome, friends. So I wanted to share something that kind of really hit me in a beautiful way while watering plants. And I'm gonna kind of set it up first before I get to the kind of the crux of the message of this video. So if you want to skip ahead, please feel free to do so. But I first want to talk about rainbows and as I see it, a metaphor. Because a rainbow is created when there's water in the atmosphere, right? We often see them after it rains. And now many people see a rainbow after a storm as, right, the calm after a storm, the light after a storm, the gifts that come when you move through a challenging experience. That is one beautiful metaphor. And just like humans, everything is complex and multidimensional. So there's many layers, many understandings that you can derive from it when you can see it through varied perspectives. And this, at least to me, feels like a way of expanding one's consciousness. So I wanted to share another metaphor that I see with rainbows, and it's not anything new, I'm sure it's out there, but essentially it's this kind of a metaphor for unity consciousness and how we are unique individual expressions within a unified field, just maybe not aware of it. So I'm going to break this down and also ground it into our everyday experience. So a rainbow, right, as I was saying before, comes when there's water in the atmosphere, because water acts as a prism. And what the prism does is there's a refraction of the light. The prism, the water droplet, refracts the light and it moves into what's called dispersion. So the light is refracted by the water droplets and disperses into the, at least what we can see, right, the visible color spectrum, of which I believe we actually only see like 1%. I will add some updated information. I'll fact check that just in case that's not accurate. That right there says a lot. But the light gets refracted and dispersed into the rainbow. And a rainbow, right, is that color spectrum from red to violet. Each color a unique wavelength, a unique frequency, yet in a unified field, right? They're individual, yet they're not really separate. You don't see a beam of red here and a beam of orange here and then yellow over here and then green over here. They're in a unified field, right? They come from a unified field, light, and they're just simply being expressed or seen in their individual wavelengths, still as a unified field. And so as I was watering my plants, let me back it up. So that is something that I've been sitting with rainbows. And I'm glad that I waited on sharing with it because it unfolded just yesterday. I was watering, and you'll probably see this very often if you water plants. You'll see a rainbow. And I thought, interesting. So light, right, is the integration of colors, of the visible color spectrum. And if we're just simply seeing it because we have water droplets refracting light, doesn't that mean through a particular lens, if light is all of the colors integrated in a unified field, does that not mean through a particular lens again, we are surrounded by rainbows? It's kind of an interesting perspective. And I'm sure someone that's been on an acid trip has probably experienced that, right? It takes them into a different state of consciousness. So through this perspective, we are surrounded by rainbows. And if every time you see a rainbow, you feel a sense of magic, whenever you're out in sunshine, whenever you're out and there's daytime, whenever you're out and the moonlight is being reflected from the sun off the moon, cascading that soft moonlight everywhere, rainbows. And again, this may or may not resonate, but it's just a way of seeing things differently. And so I'm going to ground this now into our actual everyday experience, okay? So it took me a long time to really wrap my head around this, but our sight, the sense of sight, is very interesting. If you actually look at all the senses, like touch, like we don't actually ever touch anything. It's actually the electron repulsion. So we're never actually touching anything. It feels like it, yes. But it's crazy when you think about we never actually make full, complete contact because electrons repel one another. So there's that, right? This idea, and when people talk about, it's a simulation, it's an illusion, ancient wisdom referred to it as Maya, you can begin to kind of see that through the senses, how we have this whole experience, and yet it's kind of not real in the way that we think, right? When you feel like you're touching something, but you're not actually making contact with it. It's giving this illusionary experience, which we can then expand out into this whole sense that this is very real, just like I can feel the connection of my palms, and yet they're not actually touching, right? It's real, and yet not. And both things can be true. So sense of sight is very interesting because it works with the rods and the cones and all the different anatomical functions of the eye with the perception of the brain. So when I'm looking right now at trees and they're green, that is because, at least from my understanding, please someone correct me if I misspeak, but yes, chlorophyll, but the leaves, right, they are absorbing all of the wavelengths of color and reflecting the wavelength of green back. So the colors that we're seeing are actually reflecting back to us a particular wavelength of color. It's mirroring it back to us. So what's interesting in a sense is that it's not actually green. It's reflecting it because it's actually not absorbing that wavelength. So again, please someone correct me if I'm misspeaking here, but that's my understanding of it. And so again, that speaks to everything as a mirror. And so when we think about back to the rainbow, if we think about living in this world of color, we do live in a world of rainbows, right? It's not that we're like surrounded by rainbows. Again, you can see that through a particular lens in terms of light, but we are surrounded by color, depending on where you live, right? If you're in a city, it might be more kind of cement, not a lot of green, but yet also beautiful colors and murals and people expressing themselves in different clothes. So even if you're not in nature, you still see the rainbows everywhere through people expressing uniquely in their own frequency, just as the rainbow, each frequency of color expressing uniquely in a unified field. That is the crux of this, right? Through a lens, we can imagine that we are actually being bathed in rainbows, because that's, light holds all those wavelengths of color integrated. And we can see it as a reflection of being a unified field, expressing uniquely, still in a unified field. And we can begin to see the world around us as also reflecting that back to us, mirroring that back to us. That we are unique expressions in and of a unified field of oneness. Okay, so I hope that made sense. Please feel free to share any comments, any questions. If I misspoke in any way, please clarify. And until next time, friends, stay curious.